So last week we discussed about your prescribed short story Action and Reaction by Chitra Fernando. We discussed actually relevant themes and characterization and some important parts related to the story. And today I decided to do our next poem because last week we did actually more than 10 sessions, we completed about our prescribed short story, and today we are going to discuss our prescribed poem. And the significance is that actually the short story and this particular poem both are actually representing Sri Lankan literature. So as we know, when it comes to advanced level English literature syllabus, basically we have different genres. And we discussed about romantic literature, we discussed about Victorian period, and then we have discussed about Shakespearean period as well. So, and these days, actually, we have been discussing about Sri Lankan literature. So, Action and Reaction by Chitra Fernando, one of the most fabulous short stories when it comes to Sri Lankan literature in English. And then, if you take this poem, one of the most interesting poems actually written by one of the Sri Lankan writers, Patrick Fernando, Fisherman Mourned by his wife, right? Fisherman Mourned by his wife, a very beautiful poem, a very beautiful masterpiece. Actually, you can use that word. It is a masterpiece because when it comes to Sri Lankan literature, when we display Sri Lankan literature, when it comes to international arena, these are the poems, these are the short stories that we can resemble Sri Lankan literature. We discuss about different types of authors. Recently, we saw a lot of authors representing Sri Lanka. They won a lot of awards related to Sri Lankan literature, a lot of Booker prizes, and Shehan Karunatilaka also won Booker Prize, and there are certain international figures when it comes to Sri Lankan literature in English, especially when it comes to Asian continent. And we have to discuss about Shehan Karunatilaka, who won the Booker Prize for his phenomenal novel. Then we have Michael Ondaatje, who wrote about the English patient and running in the family, who also represents Sri Lankan literature. And then we have Patrick Fernando, and who wrote about this poetry. And the Sri Lankanness is something that we always enjoy when it comes to this type of work, right? Okay, so today we are going to learn about a poem. And let's first and foremost, it is better to get some kind of idea about the writer, about the poet. So it will definitely help you to understand the entire poem. So we will move on to the writer. So you guys can write down, I will explain. Patrick Fernando, he was born in 1931, died in 1983, a Sri Lankan poet who won international recognition. He is considered as one of the most accomplished poets in Sri Lanka, writing in English. As I have said, a lot of poets, a lot of authors, like several names I have actually given to you: Michael Ondaatje and Chitra Fernando, Patrick Fernando, and we discussed about a lot of writers actually who represented Sri Lanka when it comes to the international arena. So Patrick Fernando is also known as one of the most phenomenal writers when it comes to Sri Lankan literature in English, who was born in 1931 and he died in 1983. A Sri Lankan poet who won international recognition and considered as one of the most accomplished poets in Sri Lanka, writing in English. Most of his subject of writing were people, things, and places the poet had been in close contact with. Significantly, Fernando's work does not make much references to milestones in socio-political histories in Sri Lanka, like independence, 1971 JEP uprising, terrorism, and introduction to open economy. So most of the writers, now this is something important, my dear students. Now, most of the writers, when it comes to Sri Lankan literature in English, like Michael Ondaatje, Chitra Fernando, and if you take most of the writers, J. Narasimhagam, most of the writers, they wrote about this different types of socio-political themes. They wrote about different types of socio-political themes, right? So when it comes to Patrick Fernando, he did not pay that much attention towards these socio-political situations and 1971 JP uprising or terrorism. So he did not bother about these common problems. He did not pay his attention to these common problems when it comes to his writing. So this is something very much significant that we have to pay our attention. Whereas most of the other writers like Michael Ondaatje, J. Narasimhanayagam, and Ranasinghe, and if you take most of the writers, they actually paid their attention towards these socio-political problems which were there at that time period, especially during the time period of 1971, right? 1971 JP uprising, terrorism, Sri Lankan independence, and open economy. Most of the writers, most of the poets actually wrote about them, right? Yasmin Gunaratne, I think you may have done O-level literature, so you may have done the poem Big Match 1983 by Yasmin Gunaratne, which discusses about this communal clash, right? If you take poems from Anne Fernando, if you take Chitra Fernando, if you take Anne Ranasinghe and Michael Ondaatje. So most of these writers wrote about these problems. But Patrick Fernando did not pay a lot of attention towards these problems. His writing style was possibly influenced by various ranges of poetry and poets, right? So Patrick Fernando is more like William Blake, right? So if you compare his writing style, he is very much alike to William Blake, where most of the romantic poets like John Keats and most of the other poets, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, when they wrote about the beauty of nature, William Blake was very much radical that he did not pay his attention towards those things, whereas he wrote about these social problems which were there when it comes to industrial England. Just like that, Patrick Fernando did not pay any attention towards these socio-economical problems. Actually, he wrote something else. He wrote about the struggle of people, the day-to-day problems that people face, especially when it comes to their occupations, especially when it comes to their professions and their lifestyles, right? So this is why he is a very special poet. His writing style was possibly influenced by various ranges of poetry and poets. Therefore, he is found as a unique figure among contemporary poets like Lakdasa Wickramasinghe and Yasmin Gunaratne. So you should not forget about Yasmin Gunaratne, where we had a poem, Big Match 1983 by Yasmin Gunaratne. When we take Anne Ranasinghe, Michael Ondaatje, and J. Narasimhanayagam, most of the Sri Lankan writers, they paid their attention towards these socio-political situations. But Patrick Fernando did not pay his attention towards these things, where he actually found something else. He wrote about the day-to-day life, the struggle of people. He wrote about the working class. He wrote about the problems of upper middle class. So these are the major themes that he took into consideration when it comes to his poetry. So this is the significant point that you all have to understand when it comes to Patrick Fernando. So hurry up and write down. Please pass me a message if you have finished. Right. So we have been discussing about our new poem, and we wrote an introduction about Patrick Fernando. So one of the key things that you have to remember about this particular writer, now most of the Sinhala writers who wrote in English, most of them, right, 90% of them actually wrote about socio-political problems, JVP uprising, terrorism, and communal clash which occurred in Sri Lanka, right? They showed their attention to these things when it comes to their writing. But when it comes to Patrick Fernando, he did not bother to actually write about these things. He actually had a different view, right? As a writer, he actually had a different viewpoint when it comes to his writing. So this is what you have to understand. Right, okay. So we will move on to the next part. I hope you guys have completed. Is there anyone who is still writing? Make sure to complete your notes then and there. Otherwise, you have to go through the recording again. And that is not going to work actually. So it is better to cover up your work then and there. That is the best option that you have. Otherwise, you are wasting your time. So don't do that. Make sure to do your work, right? Okay. So furthermore, we will come to the introduction to the poem. This is something very much important. As I told you, this poem is actually representing the 20th century. We are discussing about Sri Lankan literature in English. The category is known to be a soliloquy. Now, basically, a soliloquy means it is actually an expression of a person by himself individually. There may be a lot of people who are listening to this particular explanation, right? This particular description. So, soliloquy means a particular person is actually expressing about his or her views alone, individually to another person. So we do not know exactly who is that other person, right? So this is the beauty of this particular poem. So we do not know exactly who is this particular person, right? So this particular wife, right? So this particular wife is actually exposing her personal experience. We can say highly personal experience. They are not personal experiences. Actually, they are very much highly personal, right? Highly personal experiences to the audience without having any second thoughts about that. So we can't exactly identify a person here, right? We do not know actually to whom these things are actually addressed by this particular wife, even though she has used the name you. So we can actually refer to that. This is for the husband, right? She is obviously discussing about husband, but it is a complete individual confession. A soliloquy can be identified as an individual confession, right? So individually, she is doing this individually by herself. So this is known to be an individual confession. So that is something very much important, right? So soliloquy refers to an individual confession about a certain experience that particular person has undergone, right? Particular experience, a particular expression. Individual, right? So there is no dialogue form, right? So only individual. So individually, this particular wife is actually telling her personal experiences to the others, right? So this is what we can understand. So when you refer to the language is very much simple and figurative. Figurative language, there are a lot of similes, there are a lot of metaphors, there are a lot of symbols as well. Now, what do you mean by a figurative language? Figurative language refers to there are a lot of symbols, there are a lot of similes, metaphors. So you have to read the entire poem in detail. You have to refer to the poem very carefully. You have to understand the connotative and denotative ideas in order to understand the poem. So you will never be able to understand the poem in the surface level. You should not try like that. So when we are actually appreciating a poem, make sure to understand we have two layers, my dear students. Now, as advanced level students, you should know about that, the two layers. Whatever the poem that we are going to analyze, we have the connotative meaning and the denotative meaning. What do you mean by the denotative meaning? Denotative means the surface level meaning. We are only paying our attention towards the surface level meaning, right? That is what we call denotative idea. Basically, we have a connotative idea as well. The connotative means the symbolical reference. As literature students, you have to realize when you are actually analyzing a poem, you have to analyze that particular poem. You have to read that poem very carefully. And more than the others, as literature students, you should be able to analyze the certain language functions, certain literature elements quite meticulously in order to understand that particular poem. That is something very much important that you have to follow, right? So that is what we do, right? So when you are going to analyze this poem in a deeper level, you will understand the language functions, you will understand the different types of literary techniques, you will understand the experience, you will understand the diction. So you will understand a lot. That is what we call figurative. Figurative refers to, in simple words, right? There is something more than the language can express. There is something more than the language can express. That is what we call figurative language, right? Figurative language means a person who is not following literature, a person who does not have any idea about literature, that person may read the poem and he will get a normal, simple idea. This is actually a poem about a fisherman's wife. That's it, right? So she is trying to explain her problems and her troubles and tribunals, different types of challenges actually faced by her. So he will have that kind of experience. But a literature student will definitely analyze the poem, and definitely he or she will be able to tell something more about that. So you are more like a detective. You are more like a detective. You know who is a detective, right? So detective is there in order to find out the evidence, in order to go through the evidence, and then finally, based on the evidence, that detective will come to a conclusion. You are like a scientist, right? You are like a scientist. You are like a detective when it comes to literature. So you have to remember that, right? So figurative language is something very much important that you have to pay your attention. It is powerful and expressive. Yes, as I told you, the entire expression by this particular wife is very powerful expression. You will understand that the language is very simple and figurative language, and it is very much expressive and very much sensitive, right? The story behind this wife is very much sensitive. You will be able to understand that one as well. Subject matter, the soliloquy of a wife over the death of her husband, right? So this is actually a mourning. So we heard the word mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. So crying and mourning are two different things, right? So basically we cry when it comes to certain matters, but when it comes to our deepest sympathies, like when some of our family members demise occurred, or if something like that, definitely we will mourn by it, right? So it is actually a different level of crying. So this wife's crying and this wife's self-confession about her emotions, her emotional destruction, and what kind of emotional chaos that she has faced due to this particular incident is actually quite clearly exposed by the writer. That is why this poem is known to be one of the best poems when it comes to English literature. One of the best poems when it comes to English literature, especially when it comes to Sri Lankan literature in English, right? So that is why Patrick Fernando is known to be one of the best writers, because I have told you several times, when all the other Sri Lankan writers, almost all of them, right? I have named a lot of them actually, Anne Ranasinghe, and if you take Jane Narasenagam, Anne Ranasinghe, Chitra Fernando, most of the writers, when they wrote about the socio-political situation, Patrick Fernando is the person who paid the attention to the experiences of our day-to-day life, especially when it comes to different types of social groups, ethnic groups. Right. So the main theme of the poem is uncertainty of a fisherman's life at sea. So Patrick Fernando discusses about the reality of life. Whatever said and done, doesn't matter what kind of religion that you believe. At the end of the day, we all have to understand the impermanence of life. So in this particular poem, Patrick Fernando touches that main theme, which is known to be a universal theme, a global theme, right? Which is about the uncertainty of fisherman's life at the sea, right? So based on that, we can discuss about the uncertainty of life, so which can be identified as one of the universal themes when it comes to English literature, when it comes to world literature as well. There are different types of other themes as well, misery of the fisheries life. So Patrick Fernando discusses about this lower class people and different types of professions which are engaged with different types of troubles and tribunals and dangers and risks. Fate of Fisherman's Wife. So here we discuss about the perspective of a wife, what kind of troubles and tribunals that she faces soon after her husband's demise. So this is not actually a fisherman's wife, even though the poem is about that. So this particular wife is actually representing a lot of women from Sri Lankan context, right? So that part you have to include when it comes to your answer. So you may say that, sir, this is only one wife. No, right? So by referring to this particular wife, this particular writer is actually representing the lifestyle of thousands and thousands of wives who live in Sri Lanka, right? So this is the situation of these wives and reality of married life, right? So this is also actually discussed here. So certain emotions, certain torments, unexpressed eternal love, unexpressed eternal torment of one's heart is also taken into consideration in this particular poem. We will discuss about that. Very personal poem, very sensitive poem, lot of personal information, highly personal information will be revealed in this particular poem when we read the poem very carefully. So you have to read it very carefully. You have to understand it very carefully. As I told you, diction is very simple. Anybody can understand, but you have to analyze the poem. Then only you can figure out certain points. Hurry up and write down. Please pass me a message. Right. So we will move on to the next part. So let's get some kind of introduction to the poem. The incident is the sudden death of a fisherman, a common incident during the time when there were no advanced technologies in fisheries industry in Sri Lanka. So this is actually, the poem is actually written during that time period where fisheries is known to be kind of a dangerous occupation. It describes the mentality of the widow wife of the dead husband. I told you it is like a kind of a confession or else a self-expression. A self-expression is actually known to be a soliloquy. That is what I told you. So this entire poem can be taken as a soliloquy, an individual expression, and it describes the mentality of the widowed wife of the dead husband. The whole poem is a confession of the bereaved wife and also an addressing to her dead husband. So in couple of places, actually, she is addressing to her husband. At the same time, she is actually explaining her personal, highly personal experiences through this poem, right? So that is the beauty of the poem. That is what we have to pay our attention as well. So hurry up and write down. Please pass me a message. Right, we will move on to the next part. So I have given you a basic introduction. What is this poem is all about? You have to remember this is a soliloquy. I have explained to you about what do you mean by a soliloquy as well. So we will move on to the explanation. So we are coming to the first stanza. Now read the first stanza very carefully. This is actually a soliloquy done by a wife, a widow. We can use the word widow because her husband was actually passed away. He was a fisherman. So he actually engaged kind of a risky profession. So at that time period, right, being a toddy tapper or else being a fisherman is known to be kind of a difficult jobs to engage in, right? Kind of dangerous, risky jobs. So it is very much unpredictable, right? So nowadays they have GPS and they have all the other new technologies, but yet, right, we have heard several times what kind of troubles and tribunals when it comes to these fishing boats actually face in their day-to-day life. So it is a very much unpredictable job. First and foremost, we have to understand this in that perspective, because this was not like going to a a certain office and work there from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock. This is not something like that, right? So they have, whether they like it or not, most of these fishermen, they keep their lives in danger. They keep their lives at a risk, and then they engage in this particular profession. Whether you like it or not, that is the reality, right? There are different types of other jobs as well, right? So if you take these toddy tappers, they are also doing the same thing. They are moving from one tree to another tree using a thin rope. So that job is very much difficult. One wrong step can end up your entire life, right? One wrong step can end up your entire life, right? That is what happens. That is what will happen actually, right? So there are certain risky jobs like that, right? Even today, people who work in all these electricity and maintaining all these electricity wires and everything, they are engaging in a kind of a risky job, right? So there are certain professions like that. So people do engage in this type of jobs in order to survive, right? So when it comes to the basic theme of hunger, people will do anything in order to survive from hunger, right? People will do anything and everything, right? So they are not going to judge whether this is a risky job or whether it is a dangerous job. So definitely they will keep their life in danger in order to engage in that particular job, in order to engage in that particular profession. So first and foremost, you have to understand that. And most importantly, when this particular incident or else when this particular poem is written at that time period, they did not have these mobile phones and Bluetooth and GPS and everything. So we can understand the danger is much more higher. The level of danger is higher, right? So this is how she starts her story, her confession. Let's read it very carefully. When you were not quite 30 and the sun had not tanned you into old boat brown. So she says, when you were not quite 30 and the sun. So here 30 means actually the age of this particular husband, right? So very young. Right, very young, right? 30 years means like very young. When you were not quite 30, not quite 30 means like you were not in your, even in your mid-30s, right? So in a very young age, right? At the age of 29, 28, 27, right? So not even in mid-30s, right? So, and the sun had not tanned you into all boat brown. Boat brown, so you have a very popular rhyming, boat brown, right? So the same consonant letter is repeated again and again, right? So we have a very powerful rhyming there, right? We will discuss about that as well. Boat brown, sound, right? The repetition of the consonant sounds, right? That is what we call alliteration, right? Repetition of the same consonant sounds. Boat brown, right? There we have alliteration, right? Had not tanned you into all boat brown. the sun. So here the weather condition is also taken into consideration, because we have to understand this is actually the setting of the poem. The setting of the poem is actually a seaside, right? Beach side. So we know about the weather, we know about the weather condition, hot sun, and tan. Tan is actually the skin color, right? The sun had not tanned you into all boat brown, right? The sun had not tanned you into all boat brown, right? So the sun is actually very much harsh. It's very much difficult weather condition to endure, right? It's not easy, right? When you were not quite 30 and had not begun to be embittered like the rest, no grown. So when you actually, the wife tries to explain the fact that when you take these responsibilities as a fisherman, you were not in that particular age even, right? You were very young, right? So you took a lot of responsibilities when you were very young. So we can't argue the fact that this particular husband is kind of a busy, kind of a lazy person, right? Kind of a very lazy person, and he did not do his work. We can't argue like that. Now you can come to a conclusion, okay, right? In the first 4 lines, in the first stanza, we can clearly come to a conclusion, okay, the setting of the poem is taken into consideration. This particular incident did not happen in Colombo 7 Gurduatta, right? So this particular incident is actually, the setting of the poem is very much similar to the beach side, right? So there, the wife says, okay, you have taken your responsibilities when you are not in your 30s, right? So you actually had to take all these, what do you call, challenges into your life. As a person, you took all these challenges, right? So this particular challenge is obsessed with death, then you would come, hot with countenance upon the sea, chased as gull, flying pointed home, in haste to be with me. So now the wife says that, okay, even though you leave, even though you are ready to go to engage in your job, your heart was always with me, just like a seagull who knows how to return to the home from its instances. So here the husband's heart, or else husband's love, husband's emotions are actually compared to a seagull. Seagull is a kind of a bird, right? So the seagull knows how to find out this particular home. Even though seagulls are actually roaming here and there in the island, they know what is their house and how to find out their house, how to find out their home. So this husband always wanted to be with the wife, which means that they were a newly wedded couple, right? They were like newly wedded couple. So even though the husband went to the job, even though the husband has taken the responsibilities of the family, he was not in that particular age, right? But he was ready to take such a risky job for the sake of wife, sometimes for the sake of family responsibilities. Even though he went for his particular job, his heart was with this particular woman, right? So he always needed to come back. He always needed to come back, right? Just like a seagull who knows how to find out the home wherever it flies, even though it flies all over the place. At the end of the day, the seagull knows this is my house, this is my home, this is the place where I should return, right? So in the first stanza, what we can understand, the setting of the poem is quite clearly explained, my dear students. And the wife says what kind of responsibility is actually taken by this particular husband at the age of 30, right? So according to the wife, he is not even 30, but he has taken a lot of responsibilities. His job is to be a fisherman. So it is a very risky job. Even though you went for that job, right? Obsessed with death. Now, this is something important. The word death is something very much important, which clearly shows us the danger, which clearly shows us the risk involved in this particular profession. Can you understand the risk involved in this particular profession, right? You have to pay your attention for that. Obsessed with death, then you would come, hot with continence upon the sea, chased as gull flying pointed home, right? So actually, the boats are not actually flying, right? They are rowing, right? Boats are actually rowing, but the immediacy the quickness of the particular fisherman in order to see his wife is quite clearly resembled here using a very beautiful diction. Can you understand? She says, you are flying to see me, right? You want to see me badly, right? This is an arranged marriage. You will get to know about that. So the couple has not met. This is not a marriage which is based on a love affair, right? So the couple has not met previously. So now they were newly married and they want to be together, right? They want to be together, right? But unfortunately, they can't do that because due to this profession, this particular boy, this particular husband should engage in his profession. Should engage in his profession. Can you understand? I hope you can understand, right? So as a result of that, what actually happened, the profession has created some kind of hindrance. The profession has created some kind of objection to their marriage life as well, right? At the same time, their love is also faced with a lot of obstacles due to this particular job because it is a very much risk involved job. That is what the wife says, right? So husband had a great immediacy and urgency to meet this particular wife, to be with this particular wife, especially to have some kind of physical engagement, sexual involvement with this particular wife, right? Because when he is actually coming out of danger, definitely a man would need some kind of physical engagement, that love and affection, love and warmth, that is natural, right? So men are in love in order to find sex, whereas women are ready to do sex in order to find love. So this is the universal theme of love, right? Men are in love in order to have sex, but women are ready to, all the women, they are ready to do sex in order to find love, right? So this is the biggest disparity that we can find between men and women, right? Men and women. So men are actually showing their love and affection. Their final motive, whatever said and done, their final motive is to, that is very much biological, right? That is very much biological. Then their final motive is to engage in sexual relationship, right? So that is actually very much badly needed in order to continue the generation, right? We have to agree with that. We are not babies now. We have to talk these things, right? But when it comes to women, my dear students, they don't engage in love, basically. They are ready to engage in sex, but after that, they are expecting love. No woman will stay in your life only for sex. That will never happen. But there will be some men who will engage in your life only to have sex. Try to understand this. You are literature students, so you should understand this, right? So men are there in order to have relationships, right? Sexual relationships, and they will engage love and affection in order to do that. But women are not like that. Women are totally different, right? They don't need sex in their entire life, right? Sex is only a part of their lives. Now, in this poem, you will understand. What they need is love and affection, love and caring, right? They always expect that, right? They need your time, right? They like when you actually take care of them. That is what they need. That is what they expect from their fathers. That is what they expect from their husbands. That is what they expect from their boyfriends. So this is the reality of women. This is the reality of ladies. We have to understand that as men, from the perspective of men. Now, I am explaining from the perspective of men. But when it comes to man's perspective, that's totally different. That's totally different, right? So we have a lot of responsibilities. Yes, the least thing that we have is our time. It's very difficult to actually sacrifice our time for another person because of our busy, hectic life. But we have to do that. We have to give our time for our children, for our parents, for our friends, for our society and the social life. We have a lot to manage. We have a lot to manage, right? So there is always some kind of conflict. There is always some kind of conflict, right? So this is what we can understand even in this poem. So that is why I told you this particular poem is very much actually highly sensitive and very much personal, right? So we discuss about these things, right? We will go to the explanation. Before that, we have certain difficult words. So please make sure to write down. Right. So these words are very much important to understand the poem. So what do you mean by embittered? Means angry or resentful at having been treated unfairly. Obsessed means preoccupy or fill the mind of someone continually and to troubling extent. Continence is self-restraint, especially with regard to sex, which means that you are not ready to engage in any other than with your wife, right? So you have forbidden yourselves engaging in sexual intercourse with any other woman than your wife. So this particular husband is such a person, according to the wife. So it again shows that his faithfulness. And chaste, abstaining from extramarital or from all sexual intercourse. Seagull is a bird lives nearby the sea, and haste refers to excessive speed or urgency of movement. Stanza number 1, explanation in simple terms. When you were quite young and had no life experience with the rough fisheries life and had not begun to experience the misery of life as the older people, and not being embittered with life and not always thinking of death, you came back home from your sea journey with your controlled desires. So even though this young man, this particular husband, had tons and tons of sexual desires, he went to the sea and he came back from the sea with quite good discipline. He maintained a quite good discipline when it comes to his sexual desires, which is something very difficult to do when it comes to men and women both, right? So we don't see that from a lot of women, but when it comes to men, right, most of the time we see that, because women in Sri Lanka, they have not given that actually permission or independence from religion or else from culture or else from any other boundaries. But this particular man was very much faithful, right? So he never engaged in any other relationships, right, until he comes to the sea. So until he comes to the house. So he says, you came back home from your sea journey with your controlled desires in haste to have sex with me, right? So you only wanted, you just wanted to, you controlled your desires, right? For a long period of time. And don't forget, my dear children, they are married. They were married from an arranged marriage. Don't forget that. So they don't know each other. They didn't have a lot of mutual relationship because like they did not associate. They didn't have any affair actually before the marriage, right? So this is kind of an arranged marriage. So obviously the couple will have that desire, right? That curiosity to know about the secrets of the other person. That is something very much natural. But if you engage in a kind of a love affair, definitely they may have kissed each other or they may have some kind of relationship. At least they may have touched their hands, right? So they have actually engaged their emotions. They may have actually shared their emotions, but we should not forget that this is actually a kind of a relationship which is based on arranged marriage. So in the next stanza, you will get to know about that. Then she furthermore says, right? So being embittered with life and not always thinking of death, you came back home from your sea journey with your controlled desires in haste to have sex with me, right? So he only had one partner, right? This partner is very much important. One partner, he always remembered that your chastity now cannot be checked because you are dead. Now that faithfulness, right? The same faithfulness that you had towards me, you never engaged with any other women. So that faithfulness, that chastity cannot be checked now because now you are dead. Now I need not to be careful of expressing my feelings. Now I can express my feelings without having any problems because now you are not there, right? Now you are not there, so I am free now. So without having any doubt, I can explain my feelings, right? So that is what I told you. The poem is very much personal and very much, very much highly personal actually, right? That is what we can understand. So hurry up and write down. Right, so we will move on to the detailed description. The first verse is retrospection. Retrospection means she is actually having a flashback. Retrospection means a flashback. You are at the present moment and you are thinking about the past. The wife recalls the early years of her married life, the youthfulness of her husband and his sentiments. It also denotes the misery of the fishery's life. Her husband is working in hot weather. The sun is personified by the poet, saying that the sun has tanned his complexion into brown in color. This color is very similar to the color of the boat. The young man was cheerful as he had no experience of the misery of life. The husband is portrayed as a faithful gentleman who never wished for the warmth of another woman. He controlled his sexual desires and emotions. The wife also did the same, but it must be hard for both of them. That is what I said. So it is not easy, right? It is not easy. So some people are thinking that it is a sin to expose your sexual desires, what do you call, in different ways or in different situations, but it's hard actually. As human beings, we all have that. Up to some extent, we can limit them, but definitely they will be exposed, right? So the limitation can be done using literature, using drama, using music, using books, novels, poems, right? So it may be hard because they are actually living a very much suffocating life. So I'm pretty sure that they don't have any options to engage in expose in this luxurious, flamboyant life in order to expose their inner feelings, right? So they had to control them, whether they like it or not. But definitely for the both parties, it was hard, right? It was hard, right? There was no doubt about that. He controlled his sexual desires and emotions. The wife also did the same, but it must be hard of both of them. Most of the fishermen come back to their houses after a long time. They spend most of their time in the sea. When the couple is newly wedded, both of them have sexual desires to fulfill, but unfortunately, the wife did not talk about that because in this society, she cannot, and she was actually abstaining from that. She is actually forbidden to talk. On the other hand, husband always waited uh, for her, and his faithfulness is also actually mentioned here using the powerful symbol, the seagull, right? So hurry up and write down. Please pass me a message.
Right, we are coming to the last slide of today's session. The narrator was waiting for the arrival of her husband. The arrival and the desire of her husband is symbolically compared to the flight of a seagull. The seagull is a bird. Birds select their partners at a young age and live together till the end of their lives. They never mate with birds other than their partners. The husband is compared to a gull as he did not wish for polygamy. Polygamy means you are engaging in, you are having extramarital relationships, or else you are having more than one wife. In the first stanza, she recollects the memories of a past which was once full of nightmares and once full of sweet dreams. First stanza exhibits us a clear picture about the early years of their marital life, right? Marital affair. So this is the last explanation. So next week we are going to discuss this in detail. We will move on to the second explanation, second stanza as well. So make sure to cover up the first stanza, make sure to go through the writing. And if you have finished, you can leave the meeting after finishing this.